Hey everyone, welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm Ray Christner, and with me,
Paul Wagner.
And Paul, today we're going to do a practice in action focusing on the idea of mentorship.
And, I think such an important topic. And I can think about just the overall significance it's had for me. And I know that there's, even been a variety of episodes where we kind of sprinkle in talks of, the mentors in our lives. And, I also know for you, kind of like the role of being a mentor and just how important it is. And yet I don't know that the mental health field does it all that well.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, I think there's varying levels. And I think, for me, it's, one of the reasons I'm really glad we're doing this is it has been such an impactful part of my career. And, I feel like oftentimes, people ask a little bit about career path. And I'm always going back to people I've met with, people who, taught me little things that wasn't in the classroom. It wasn't, it were things that happened at conferences. It was, different ways. And they were invaluable. Like, I think, without those mentoring experiences, I think, my career could have taken a whole different path, and it's just opened up a lot of doors. And then on the other end, being someone who's been in the career long enough, now seeing people who I've mentored or who were students of mine who are doing really cool stuff way beyond what my capacity to do is awesome. Like, so it's, there's such a win-win in kind of this idea of mentorship.
And I think that's such an important piece of it. Mentoring isn't a one-way street. There's a reciprocation that happens. And, it doesn't also have to be, this person, I only have one mentor. Certainly at varying points, I've had like 3 or 4 mentors on differing skills or even on shared skills, but just differing approaches. And it's been so helpful. And, even early, like kind of early on in our youth, we have coaches, we have teachers, like we can kind of view those individuals as mentors, religious leaders. And, but as we're getting more into our field, really trying to have an understanding of, with mental health practice, what is the route to take? And I can recall very specifically kind of this idea of like, okay, I didn't know a counseling degree really existed when I was in psychology. And it wasn't until like my third year of my undergrad program where, we're going down over the different career paths. And I was like, okay, this is interesting because that's really what I was interested in doing. And I really thought it's like, okay, I'm needing to go into the doctoral route. Like I'm needing to go into clinical psychology. And I got a chance to go and sit down with that professor, and that professor is, it was just like so brilliant in being able to kind of share like, no, here, like, let's look at these paths, and, connected me with certain individuals. And, from that point on, it was totally changed the scope and trajectory of what I thought, where I thought I was going. And, I think that's what a mentor does, is a mentor opens doors and kind of creates these pathways that we don't see or that feel like, hazy or murky. And they really bring a sense of clarity and confidence because that path has already been walked before.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I want to jump back to your comment about reciprocity. Like, I think that's just so important, because I think that, I've heard people, unfortunately, make comments of, I just don't have time to mentor other people, or I don't have time to supervise other people. And, my experience has been so different. Like, I mean, I've become so much better because of people that I've mentored. And, it's one of the people that I had mentorship from used a quote a long time. He had a quote that he'd said a long time ago, and it was actually a Carl Jung quote. And he said, and I'm going to give you the exact quote, but it says, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And he said this in relation to a mentorship session we were having. And he said, gosh, like our work together just changed what I've done. This was a really seasoned person who I was like, oh, like, okay, I had like an influence. That feeling for me, contributing not only his contributions to me, but me contributing to him as a pretty young psychologist, truly was like, I mean, it was professionally changing for me. Like, it was like the first time I went, wow, like there's a lot of value in what I bring to the table, to these relationships. And then it builds confidence, and then it builds, so then there's this whole steamroll effect. So that reciprocity is so key. And I'm glad you kind of use that term, because this really is a street where we both become better in mentorship, which is awesome.
And I guess I'm curious, like maybe not necessarily getting into all the varying, skills and mentors, but, for you, like, I mean, kind of even in our interactions, I mean, you have certainly been a mentor for me, Ray, and kind of going through this. And,
thank you.
And I here recently was given a presentation to a local school district, and I used one of your quotes in there, talking about quotes. And, you've shared with me of like, you'd always start with a quote and end with a joke. And just that idea, like, it's okay. Hey, here's like, I'm kind of, with the podcast, I feel far more comfortable speaking. And it's like, okay, I'm going and giving this presentation, and now having just a framework to be able to operate from. And, so even just in simple conversation, and that's, those quotes that can just stick with us in those moments. And certainly that it changes the way that I practice. Even a lot of these conversations we have with guests, it can be just a brief moment. But I think that can also be mentorship. Like, mentorship doesn't necessarily need to be, again, this, exaggerated time period, but it can be those brief interactions like you were talking about at a conference. It's just like, just a moment can really change that trajectory. But it's that moment where that reaction happens. And I absolutely love that quote from that your mentor shared with you.
Yeah. Like I said, Carl Jung. It's directly from him. Not that he was my mentor, but it's interesting because I thought that the same thing. It's interesting that the podcast itself has same thing for me. It's changed, from our conversations, but also like I find that my role changes every time we have a guest on. Like, I feel like I do something different and better, which is kind of awesome. I've been lucky. Like I've just had the chance to just have great mentors in my career. And I know I've shared with you, and I guess maybe timely in the sense of, Phil Zimbardo recently, passing away, and not that Phil Zimbardo was a mentor of mine, but I share a story. Like, I was a young docs. I think I was a first year doc student, and I was at an APA conference, and I was standing in line to get lunch, and I turn around, and that's who's behind me is Phil Zimbardo. And, even at that point, I knew who he was, the Stanford prison study. I mean, everybody kind of knows it. And I was a little awestruck. Like, I was like in this kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is Phil Zimbardo. So I just basically just turned around and I introduced myself and just said, I'm familiar with your work, which, probably he hears all the time. But, just kind of introduced and said, it was, really nice to meet you. And I turned around and kind of got my lunch and sat at a table, and I was sitting by myself, and all of a sudden he comes over and he sits down and he's like, can I join you? And absolutely. And all of a sudden, like, for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, we have this conversation, and he's, asking me about, what I was doing in graduate school. And he was telling me about traveling to Italy and doing things with the American Italian Psychologists Association or some group like that, and the work that he was doing. And it was this wonderful exchange. And I tell that story because it honestly, I think that was a career changing moment. And I never spoke with him again until we had the podcast and we were going to have him on. And unfortunately, he was unable because of health reasons. But, all that time I was like, wow, there are people in this field who we look up to, we think are doing, all this brilliant work, who are at the end of the day approachable and want to share and want to have conversations. And that little piece, not that he mentored me necessarily in psychology, but he changed my perception about approaching people that I wanted to work with. And in that instant, that was such a powerful interaction that I don't know that he could recognize that from that moment on, I was never worried about seeing somebody that I thought was wonderful in the field and just walking up and saying, "Hey, I'm familiar with your work. Can we talk?" Or maybe reaching out by email to somebody. And that's just opened so many doors for me. And I mean, what a 20-minute mentorship that he doesn't even know happened. Like he was just having lunch, but life-changing in my career.
And I love that story. And when you were sharing it the first time, and it sparked some conversations. And I don't think it's going to be the last time we're talking about, Zimbardo, especially with him passing here recently, and hoping we can do a future episode. But when you were sharing that, just like this idea of the ripple effect that it can have, and the importance maybe of like what makes a good mentee. And one of the first pieces is a willingness to put yourself out there, and like a willingness to be mentored in a way. And so that's, I think, a crucial piece that if we are closed off, or if we're not taking those steps, I don't know that we get that dynamic, or it's at least not as effective, and we're a bit more passive in the process. But I think one of those just key pieces is we have to be willing to take that leap of faith. And I don't know that it always works out, but we learn from it regardless.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That, I mean, definitely, as if we want to have someone mentor us, we have to think of that. And I think the other piece of it is we also have to, I think, as a mentee, be willing to be open-minded and sometimes have critical feedback that's maybe not comfortable. I mean, some of my best mentoring experiences in the moment felt like, oh my gosh, this is really heavy. Like this is, I didn't want to hear that I wasn't doing everything perfect, but I'm so glad in hindsight that I was told I wasn't doing everything perfect. And it's made me, I think, better at what I do. And so with kind of getting a thicker skin, it prepared me, I think, for a lot of things. One of the first, I think, projects I was involved in was writing a journal article. And, I had a professor I was working with who, really kind of prepared me, we're going to submit this, but no, like might probably get rejected. Like this journal takes 6% of the submissions. Like it was a really hard journal to get into. And even if they do accept it, it's going to come back with all these critiques and preparing me to be ready for critical feedback and to not be offended by it, and to realize how much that has, let me accept things and then develop better things because of being willing to get feedback. Again, what an invaluable skill that mentorship had. I mean, have you had things like that with your people that you've mentored with?
I have. And so often, you're describing that feeling of like, it's like this really heavy conversation, and like you kind of, you can almost feel crestfallen in a way, but being able to really recognize that it's not really meant as a judgmental criticism. It's meant as, let me give you feedbacks to improve. And I think if that can be the perspective taken, it really helps us recognize and develop skills, or even recognize like, shortcomings or challenges that we face. I know for me, one of my mentors during my practicum was talking about he's like, hey, your clinical work is great. Your paperwork is the focus. Like, let's really kind of look at like, and a bit of that was a bit of time management. And he's like, okay, like, hey, and so often he and I had this like kind of jovial, like pause, like just kind of a learning through conversation interaction. But that was a time where it was like, oh, okay, like I need to take this really seriously. And I was able to take that and adapt it and trying to say, okay, and making it work for me. And, this is coming off the heels of our productivity conversation. And that was something where, we were talking about time blocking. I was like, okay, I need to block time for getting ahead. It was writing more of a curriculum rather than necessarily doing clinical notes, but it was, I need to make sure my groups that I'm going to be preparing for have the materials, so that way we're able to be well prepared, and recognizing that process, and something that, I knew, but I was kind of avoiding, and he was able to shine a spotlight on it, but in a compassionate way that really let me develop the skills necessary to improve there.
Yeah. I mean, boy, isn't that the key, right? Like the idea that mentorship pushes you. It pushes you into doing things differently and thinking different. And yeah, I've had mentors who just told me good things, and they were awful mentors. Like, they were nice people. They were good friends. Some are still good friends, but they didn't change the trajectory of what I did, and didn't make me better and make me think different and go, hey, like when you said, like, this is serious. Like, I have to focus on this. Like, that is so much what I've appreciated from mentors, those that have challenged me, that have, been critical and said, hey, like, this isn't good. I think they have been the best mentors, and I don't think you have to do that harshly. Like, I've had a couple who, they could have probably said things nicer, and it would have maybe been a better conversation. But it doesn't. You can have good, constructive, critical conversation without it being offensive either. And I think that's also, I think, skills of a good mentor. And and I think you said something earlier that's been in my mind, like, do we do a good job of this in mental health, like in mental health fields of mentorship? And I don't know. I think you're right. I wonder, maybe we do from a clinical standpoint. Like, maybe, people tell you got to do better paperwork, and here's how you write a good note, and here's how you do on these cases. But I think for me, the mentors that have, I think, meant the most to me took me out of the box of just being a good clinician, and taught me how to have a career in mental health, that there was something different than just going into an office and doing therapy. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I love that part of my job. I love, person to person interaction to help people. It's why we do this. But I also appreciated the people who were like, why don't you think about writing? Why don't you go and do a presentation? Let's talk about finances, and how can you enhance your financial situation? Because, hey, in mental health, you may not make that much money, but here's some ways you can make extra money. Like, what another great way to have mentorship. I mean, I think I've told you the story. I mean, my first book was a book that I never thought I was going to write. Dr. Art Freeman, who passed away several years ago, but who's a great mentor and was a wonderful friend to me. I was a doc student, and I'm sitting here today at a conference as we're doing this recording, at the conference that I got introduced to publishing. So it was we're at the Association for Behavior and Cognitive Therapy, so ABCT conference, and we're on the floor, meaning that the vendor floor, and I always just thought we went there to buy books. Like, that was, we were seeing what the latest books were out there. And all of a sudden, Dr. Freeman or Art says, hey, let me introduce you to the acquisition editors. And I said, what is that? He goes, well, they're here to find new authors. Like, that's why they come to conferences. They don't make enough money selling books. This is how they do business. And I'm like, what? Like, they're like, this is happening behind the scenes. Like, when did this start? And he's like, oh yeah, like, this is, so he's like, here, I'm going to show you how to do it. So he takes me on the floor, and he says, he introduces me to a guy, George Zimar, who was a wonderful publisher with Routledge Publishing. And he says, George, this is Ray. Ray, tell him about the book you want to write. And I never thought I wanted to write a book. Like, I mean, at that moment, I'm like, so literally I've had ideas of things that I was interested in. So I started talking about my interests, and he said, wow, that's a great idea. Like, you should write a proposal. And all of a sudden, I'm at a conference sitting in my room writing a proposal and bringing in, colleagues that you've met like Rosemary Minuti, who was ended up being part of that book as well. And so Ro and I wrote this first book together, which Ro and I just on Monday released the third edition of this same book, all out of a mentorship on the spot moment of something that I never knew existed. That's good mentorship. And challenged me to, on the spot, come up with ideas and not to overthink it. If he would have told me to go back in my room and think of ideas, I probably would have come up with nothing. But I was put on the spot, and it made me, I think differently. And now, I for the last 4 years, 25 years, I come to conferences different. Like so part of my time here, I'll meet with publishers and talk about ideas and see if, that's something that maybe is something they'd be interested in. If it wasn't for that one day, 25 years ago, I probably would have never published anything. So, that's good mentorship.
And I mean, you shared that story a number of times, and just every time, like, it captures just the essence of what inspired, desire for this episode, which is like just the idea of personal growth, the idea of growing within the field, the idea of growing as a mentor, because now Art's along on that journey with you and kind of going and helping, but also inspiring, you're inspiring differing ideas. And, so how, interdependent these are, where each individual or each part of it, or each person involved is connected, and you're that catalyst for one another. And I'm also left thinking about what are the ways that doesn't happen as often or frequent in mental health, because for every individual, for everyone that gets introduced to those book publishers, what are all the ideas or the concepts that don't? And I agree, we have, I mentioned the practicum, and we have these different pieces to help develop clinical skills, but we don't really promote that. Hey, you can be a competent, writer. You can be, a business owner. You can be doing these things. You can create a podcast. You can promote the field in differing ways, and the core pieces of it are happening in that direct interaction or those direct interventions with the clients. But so much of it, so much of how things change come from these interactions and opportunities that come off of a conversation. And the catalyst for this podcast, happened through a conversation, and it's seeing how that's developed. And then we've shared before, how hoping to take this into continuing ed, again, that these different conversations and how it can really unfold. And prior to some of those, never thought any of those pieces would happen. And even, trying to think of, for myself, of differing ways where, I don't know that I have any long-standing, mentees, but those moments where I can help to mentor someone, and even outside of the mental health field. I have, some friends that will approach me hey, I know you can't tell me too much, in terms of the therapy side of things, but I'm kind of lost on medication. What are these pieces? And I have, family that are approaching hey, do you think I should go for an evaluation? And just being that maybe individual that they can go to help get a bit of direction. I'm not the one who's directly interacting and engaging, but I can sit down with them and share the path and share hey, this is how I would recommend approaching it. I think you're going to get, a better level of care if you take this way versus this way. And it gives them a bit of mentoring them into entering into mental health, for themselves as consumers. And so I think it, in a variety of ways, we can view ourselves both as mentees and mentors constantly.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes we don't realize how much of an impact we have on other people. Going back to the Zimbardo story, I would even say, you said you don't think you have many mentees, but I would look at it as our relationship as being a very reciprocal mentor-mentee kind of situation, where Yeah, I remember sitting down before we did the podcast. Like, I had no clue how to do a podcast. Like, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I listen to them, but I'm like, yeah, the technology part of it, and like, the stuff that you've imparted to me to do this and to kind of go, I've presented to audiences, but to be on a microphone and to record it and to not get, know what your audience is thinking, like that was outside of my realm. But it was those interactions that we had that then led to us disseminating information in a different way. And I think that's the power of it. Like it's maybe I had some ideas and some contacts that we could get this started. And then you brought a knowledge of technology and podcasts and how we edit this stuff and how do we get it on to, actually sound decent, and, how do we structure these things? And, that's where, again, that's where the reaction happens, right? Like, I mean, without you, I would have never done this. And possibly without me, you would have never done this. But together, it kind of happens. That's what happened with Art and I in our books. It's what happens, with Ro and I all the time when we write, and other colleagues that I work with. It's where that relationship's so powerful. So yeah, I think these mentorships happen all the time. And I'm glad you brought up about people maybe not even in the profession, because I do think that we mentor people even just in our own lives that maybe aren't in mental health, but we're providing some guidance. It doesn't mean we're providing service to them, but helping impart knowledge and, disseminating information that's good for people.
And I think that's just like such an important part of this, where, I guess in this mentoring mentee relationship there, as we're talking, there's like these three pieces that keep coming up. And it's, one is the kind of the willingness to learn and the willingness to take feedback and be open, and kind of like, that adage, you can't fill it, or, coming in with an empty cup, or at least some space in our cup that we're able to take in new information and learn and grow. But the other side that I hear is we have to also be confident in ourselves. We have to be able to feel like we have something to offer, and recognizing the value that has, because for Phil Zimbardo, it was getting lunch and, sharing some of the things that are going on. And for you, it was this transformative experience, and the recognition that I think each individual has that power, that ability.
Yeah.
And I think this third piece of some form of relationship, and it, again, doesn't have to be a long-standing relationship, but a really present-oriented one. I had the thought earlier of, I mentioned like even in childhood, like, teachers can be mentors for us, but my thought then went to like, not all teachers are mentors to all students, but all mentors are teachers. And so, there's has to be some form of interaction that goes a bit beyond just sharing new information. There has to be some personalization for that moment, however brief, to help open up a new pathway and a new guidance there.
I think those are three great points to make. And I think they apply no matter which part of the mentoring relationship you're in. Like, I mean, I think even as a mentor, you can't have a full cup. You have to have that little space to also grow in that process. And yeah, I mean, I think those are great ways to summarize it. It is that it is those three things that come into play. And it's I think it's such an important piece to my career. And I mentioned I'm at the ABCT conference, and I got up this morning and I went down to get registered, and I hear my name called, and it's a gentleman who was a doc student of mine. Gosh, probably in 2008, somewhere around that range, and so I'll shout out Dr. Brian Kaufman. He's a psychologist in the New Jersey, New York area, and he is. He called my name. I haven't seen him for years. But, Brian was a guy who was in classes with me. It was, part of his dissertation process and all of those things. And it was like, I've just, saw him a week ago. Like, I mean, it was like that relationship is so important and comes back. And hearing the great things that he's doing and hearing, the things that he's doing to change lives of people, like, are great. And it's like, I said, as I was walking up here to record, I thought, there's no better way to start your day. Like I said, it just is such an empowering thing. And again, that relationship piece, which I know, I think we bring up relationship at least, once an episode, it feels like, or at least every
at
other
least.
episode. Yeah, it feels that way. But wow, how powerful it is. And, it's like, and then, just hearing again what he's doing and what other, students that was in his class that he has connection with. And it's great. And again, being able to see people do things better than what you do them is just so awesome in that role. And I mean, I think we all should take time to do it, no matter what level it is. Being a mentor and never stop being a mentee, I think is key.
And especially like if we're looking at it from that more mentor perspective, like I can't help but think about the Barbie movie, and there's a great, it's just a very such a well done movie, but there at the very end, the actress who was playing Barbie is there talking to the individual who's kind of the creator of Barbie, with Mattel, and she's sharing the idea of being a mother, and what being a mother is at times it's standing still, and being that support to help your daughter surpass you and to continue to thrive and grow. And got such a beautiful sentiment, and also I think one that we can also apply here a bit. And it's not in a parent-child relationship, but there's still a development of growth and skill and a desire to see them thrive. And so, in being a mentor, a part of it is helping to promote and great things that go beyond yourself. And then also, if we get the value of being a mentee, we also get to go and do those great things. And if we get to play both roles, we get the benefits of both. And, I think something I want to encourage all of our listeners to really try to think about the individuals in their lives that they're helping to grow and support, and the individuals who are helping to support them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, as you were saying that, I'm sure people can look this up and find it on YouTube, but there's a video of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, who at one point, I want to say he won a Golden Globe. And what was interesting was, what an interesting guy in so many ways, and his kindness and I mean, it was definitely part of my childhood. But this guy gets this award for a lifetime achievement, and he stands up there and he says, "I want everybody to just pause, and I'm going to time how long it's going to take, or how long we're going to take, and I want you to think of all the people in your life who got you here." And it's not about, so he made this whole speech not about him. Like, he won a lifetime achievement award. He made it about all of his mentors that got him there. And he encouraged the whole audience to just pause for a second and think of the legacy that kind of happens to get us where we're at in our career. And it's one of the most, it's maybe 25 seconds and maybe one of the best speeches of an award ceremony I've ever seen. And literally people in the audience who are, many actors and actresses, are just tears running down their face as they think about the power of what influence people have. And it's quite beautiful. Like, it's actually like when you were saying about like the Barbie movie and stuff, it was like, for some reason that clicked in my head, because I thought, gosh, here's a guy who, was part of many people's lives and in their living rooms in the morning. And the day that he wins the speech, that's where he goes. He goes to all the people that shaped who he was. And man, if we all just do a little of that, right? I mean, it's just I think a cool concept. So yeah, you got to check out the video. It's, I don't know, maybe we can find the clip and put it in the show notes, because it is an awesome just short clip to watch.
No, I love that. And I think when we're wrapping up, I'm gonna be going and searching for that myself.
Yeah.
And right, as God, sharing that, and as we're talking, we're sharing about like all these, like, just how valuable and the great experiences with mentorship that we've had. And it reminds me of a recent, if it was an article or even just kind of just a short little blog post that someone had made, sharing how they felt like they weren't getting the mentorship that they wanted or needed from their clinical supervisor, and that they were going to an AI program and they felt like they were getting more out of that experience with the AI program than they were from the clinical, from their clinical supervisor. And, that really had me pausing and thinking, just kind of like, what is happening there? And, and I'm a huge, I think AI is a wonderful tool, but going back to those three pieces of, we have to be, a willingness to learn, a willingness to teach and share, and the ability to have some form of relationship and kind of being present. I don't know that AI fulfills all of those pieces at the very least. And, I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I guess, I've been so, I guess, lucky or blessed or whatever word we want to use in my career, because I've just haven't had that. Most mentors I really gotten something out of, and I'm sure that's not the experience for everybody. So part of me is like maybe a little saddened to hear that, like that's what people want. But I guess maybe if people are having those experiences, I think maybe we have to step back and ask a couple questions. One is, what do I want from mentorship? What am I looking for? And if you're just looking for answers, then yeah, probably AI is going to give it to you. If you just want something to tell you the information, then that's it. And but if you want to be better at critically thinking and you want to process things, I don't know that AI can do that. And I think so. Asking questions, what do we want? And maybe the other question is, what are we bringing? Because I mean, I think that's, as somebody who's been on both ends, I think what we bring to the mentoring table is important. When we had Bob Friedberg on a while back, I told the story about meeting Bob for the first time, and honestly, I actually get emotional when I think about this. Actually, his comment, but he said to me, in that episode, and I wasn't expecting it, but I said, I had approached him and he, said, "Hey, let's do something together." And his response when we were talking about it was, "I saw something in you." And that's why I invited you. Like you brought something to the table was kind of what I heard from him. And I thought, wow, okay. Like I didn't think about it that way. Like I thought of like, my whole career up to this point, I'm thinking, man, this guy's just this wonderful guy. And then he reciprocates it back and goes, no, like there was something in our interaction that you brought that made me want to connect with you and do something. So the person that's in this AI experience, I would say maybe we have to self-reflect a little bit and kind of go, what are we bringing to that? Are we just asking questions and expecting answers? Or are we challenging that person and we are looking at a relationship where we both get better? So I think that, yeah, I mean, I hope people don't think mentorship is somebody telling you what to do or just giving you information that you can read. Mentorship's a process. Mentorship is, those three things that you've mentioned, that, the relationship, the teaching, the learning, all of those things. And I don't know, maybe AI gets there one day, but I don't know. I don't know if that's, if we're talking about the same thing. I think that from my standpoint, there's a lot more to it. I can read and get knowledge, but that never replaces the process that happens when you're connecting with somebody where you do that can help you kind of advance what your knowledge is. So that's just my take. I mean, what's your thoughts on it?
And really, it's that the willingness to learn, the willingness to be wrong or take feedback. And, I don't know for this individual, and certainly it could be,
Sure.
That the mentor themselves, was just more so regurgitating information. So like that is
right.
absolutely possible. But, in that, then I don't know that I would necessarily even identify that as a mentoring relationship to begin with.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, maybe there wasn't a relationship, but being able to recognize, in this, I'm supposed to feel challenged. I'm supposed to feel vulnerable. And in that, being built up and being, kind of cultivating a better version of myself. And, I'm thinking of, even some individuals in my life that I think there's almost this sense of distrust when it comes to others. And it's like, well, what are your intentions? Or are you just using me? And like,
sure.
In some ways it's like, yeah, but also you're using me, and like, that's not a bad thing. We can use each other to better each other, and like that. And let's be open to the process. So I guess like that's the, when talking about, the learning, a huge part of that is I'm open to the process, and I'm open to the ups and downs, and, the hardships and the wins. And I'm hoping that person's able to find someone that can really kind of help support them in that, because AI is a great tool, but it is a tool.
That's a tool. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up. Yeah. I mean, listen, there are bad mentors out there. Like, I mean, I don't want to take that. I mean, there are some people who just are in it for the wrong reasons, and that happens. But I think if you're in that situation, again, be reflective, ask some questions about what you want. And if it's not the right person, find someone else. There's a lot of people that are willing to connect. And like I've said, like I've been shocked how many people I've just kind of met for the first time and said, hey, I'd like to connect. And, we've partnered on things, and they've taught me things, and hopefully I've taught them things. So ask other people, find somebody that you're interested in their work and reach out to them. And, I think what we have going for us in the mental health field, and is maybe social services in general, is we are a group that want to help. And I love when people ask me questions. I think it's great. Like, I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, there's times that, unfortunately I can't do it because of maybe a scheduling thing, but I am never, it's never off-putting. And I hope that the people that feel that way, then ask somebody else. Don't give up on the process because you had a bad experience. Ask around and find somebody that maybe fits your needs better. And I think it's because there is somebody that will do.
And, I don't think we often do this, but I guess this is maybe a bit of that call to action to our audience of, reflect, engage in some of that self-reflection there for yourselves of, be willing to be that expert, be willing to be that learner, be willing to connect. And, we're going to make the world a better place.
That's it. I agree.
Yeah. And I'll say, and with that, we hope you enjoy this episode. Check back in with us in 2 weeks. But until then, be well and stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.